race for the White House is reaching the final stretch, with both campaigns making their pitches to voters across the country. Vice President Kamala Harris wrapped up a media blitz this week, touting her economic policies and walking a fine line between her ties to President Biden and efforts to frame herself as a candidate of change. Meanwhile, former President Trump continues to focus his energy on Pennsylvania. He held 2 rallies there yesterday. Both sides are desperate to secure the state's crucial 19 electoral votes. In the end, it'll come down to just a handful of these battleground states that will decide the next president. Joining me now with the latest swing state numbers is Senior Director of Emerson College Polling, Matt Taglia. Matt, in your latest poll, Trump holds a small lead in 4 swing states, all within the margin of error. The race is very much a toss-up. Lots of focus on Pennsylvania here. How would you describe where the race is at right now?
Yeah, so it is extremely close. We've seen some mixed movement across states since our September poll, some narrowing in Georgia, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And then in Pennsylvania specifically, it's almost the same as in September. So 49% back Trump versus 48% for Harris. And when we asked those undecided voters if they had to decide which candidate to choose, we get 50% Trump and 49% Harris, almost no change for a Trump +1. So overall, I think this is good news if you're on Team Trump. I think if you're on that team, you want to see him maintaining where he has been in Pennsylvania, not dipping below that. And it's been pretty consistent. However, Harris does win independents and she wins female voters, but it's not by a substantial enough margin, I would say, 54% versus 43%. You know, she has obviously come a long way from where Biden was in the state when he was at the top of the ticket. But, you know, if I'm on that team, I would like to see her push her number more substantially among female voters, especially as well as among independents. But we're just running out of time. So it remains to be seen whether she can do that.
Well, in your poll, Kamala Harris is tied with Trump in Wisconsin. Both are at 49%. And the gender breakdown is interesting here because 54% of men break for Trump and 53% of women support the vice president. What are the biggest issues for these voters in the state, and what could ultimately sway the state in favor of either candidate?
Yeah, and I'm going to sound like a broken record here because the economy is the top issue. And that's true across party lines, and it's true across gender. So, you know, the same is true among young people as well. A majority of those under the age of 50 say that the economy is their top issue, and that expands even more when you include things like housing affordability. So, you know, Trump wins these voters who say the economy is their top issue by about a 2-to-1 margin. So, you know, the good news for Harris here, I think, is that threats to democracy is the second place issue. She wins overwhelmingly among those voters, and she also wins among voters who say that things like health care and abortion access are their top issues. So that's still a sizable chunk of the population. But, you know, on the other hand, we also see that immigration is a major issue, both in Wisconsin and other states, and Trump overwhelmingly wins these voters, in some cases 99%, which is an astounding figure. So, you know, I think the bottom line is time is running out. It remains to be seen whether Harris can pick up some of these economic voters, these immigration voters. But barring some major news, I don't see much movement there.
Well, Hurricane Helene and the recovery efforts have become a campaign issue. Do you think we could see any major changes in Georgia or North Carolina as voters assess the Biden-Harris administration's handling of the response?
Yeah, and these are extremely competitive states. So we've seen both of them flip and flop a little bit since Harris has been on the ticket. Right now, we see that Trump leads by 1 in North Carolina after the undecided push, and that they are tied in Georgia. We also see that independents are effectively split. And, you know, these are the voices that the Harris campaign are going to need in states like Georgia and North Carolina. But, you know, the reality is people are still, you know, some folks still don't have power. All eyes have been and will be on the administration's handling of this. Early voting is set to start within the week. Some ballots have already gone out. So we can only speculate on the effect of turnout. There could well be a decline when people are still putting the pieces back together. So I certainly think that the stakes are raised and that all eyes are going to be on the administration and specifically the vice president.
All right, let's take a closer look at Arizona, where Harris has gained ground for Democrats since July, jumping from 44 to 47%, though Trump is still holding a 2% lead, you can see there. When you look at the state's Senate race, Democratic candidate Ruben Gallego holds a significant lead on Republican Kari Lake. And this is a phenomenon we've seen throughout the cycle, with Democratic Senate candidates running ahead of the party's presidential candidate. What do you think is behind this? Do you think there could be more split ticket voting than we've seen in the past?
I think the short answer is yes. There will be more split ticket voting potentially. And the other side of that is its independence. So these voters who aren't necessarily wedded to the Republican Party specifically, they are breaking for Gallego at a much higher rate than we would necessarily expect, and a higher rate than for Gallego than for Trump. Lake is only winning 83% of those who say they voted for Donald Trump in 2020. We would expect that number to be higher, all else being equal. So we've talked about this a little bit before, but we consistently see these Republican Senate candidates, gubernatorial candidates, sort of unable to create that magic that Trump does at the top of the ticket.
Well, Vice President Harris has now pulled ahead in Nevada, holding a 1-point lead in your poll. And this is a state where President Biden was polling way behind before exiting the race. So how do you think Harris has turned it around, and how in play do you think Nevada is at this point?
I do think that Nevada is in play, but we have seen fairly consistent numbers for Harris here since she has been on the ticket. And I think the short answer is that she's consolidated some of this vote that had drifted away from Biden previously, namely consolidating the Hispanic voters in Nevada, younger voters. We see much higher margins here for her than we ever saw for Biden. And overall, we just see less undecided and a little bit more engagement. So I think it's still competitive, but right now, the way that we see it and that we've seen over the past few weeks, Nevada looks like one of the best states for Harris.
All right, before I let you go, taking a look at the bigger picture here of Emerson's polling, are there any other major takeaways you have or anything that you're watching in between now and Election Day?
Yeah, I mean, one of the major takeaways is that polling has been fairly consistent across firms and across the past 2 or so months. We've seen a few bounces here and there for either candidate, but it's remained fairly consistent. And that consistency is that the race is very tight in these swing states. So Harris clearly has more momentum than Biden ever did. But, time is running out. I don't know that it's going to be enough to get her over the finish line. We'll see over the next few weeks. And we're planning to have at least one national poll per week up until Election Day.
Matt Taglia of Emerson Polling, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
A rare once-in-a-lifetime comet is set to soar across the night sky and won't return for another 80,000 years. The comet, known as C2023A3 to scientists, is expected to be visible to the naked eye across the northern hemisphere in October. According to NASA, the best way to watch the comet will be October 12th to the 26th. It will be most visible a few minutes before sunrise or after sunset. It's common for some comets to completely break up from the heat of the sun. Those that do survive could take centuries before they approach Earth again. And one last thing before we go. On this day in 1984, Kathryn Sullivan became the first American woman to walk in space. Sullivan joined NASA in the class of 1978, completing 3 space shuttle missions. After leaving NASA, she continued to break boundaries, becoming the first woman to dive to the lowest point on Earth in the Mariana Trench. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Bianca Facchinei. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.